What's up, Wisecrack? Michael here. Whether you stan or hate Hamilton, you've probably heard about a little controversy. The Founding Father-themed rap musical is full of hideous lies. For example, Hamilton's onstage love interest, Angelica Schuyler, very clearly raps that she had no brothers.
My father has no son, so I'm the one who has the social glide for one.
And yet, she had at least one. Okay, who cares, right? But it got me thinking. In every piece of historical fiction, there's gotta be some line between actual fact and necessary fabrication. And despite the collective eye rolls we all get when someone chimes in, actually, Schuyler was also married when she met Hamilton, this problem raises a pretty important question. Does watching historical fiction ironically make us dumber about history? Or is a musical like Hamilton an important tool to get people to care about colonial fiscal policy?
But Hamilton forgets, his plan would have the government assume states' debts. From
Hamilton to Bohemian Rhapsody to Vice to even a game like Assassin's Creed, historical fiction is either a great learning tool that your hungover substitute teacher can put on with the lights out, or it's, well, a horrible crutch used by said hungover teacher who really would like to just close their eyes. So what's the deal? Let's find out in this Wisecrack edition on historical fiction. And spoilers ahead for true historical events and also stuff people made up about them. But before we get into it, I want to give a shout out to this week's sponsor, our patrons. But they probably won't see this because they have access to all of our videos ad-free. Now, if you can and want to support us, you should check it out. Patrons get access to ad-free content, our patron-only Discord, research documents for our videos, and more. We even throw in unlisted bonuses like Wisecrack Hangouts where we stream games and do Q&As. If that sounds interesting, head over to patreon.com/wisecrack or check out the link in the description. Now, back to Hamilton. Alright, let's be clear. Any writer who wants to condense someone's entire life story into a few hours of screen or stage time has to make some hard choices. For example, in many biopics, it's common for the writer to combine several real-life people into a single character or to invent a new character altogether to further the plot or make a point. If Bombshell invents a generic ambitious news anchor who's a stand-in for the many real women she represents, that's not that bad, right? Hamilton, based on Ron Chernow's 2004 biography of the man, also has to use some artistic license in dealing with history. The musical chronicles the political career of the American founding father and dope lyricist and his journey from immigrant orphan
moved in with the cousin committed suicide, left him with nothing but ruined pride, something new inside
to Secretary of the Treasury. Along the way, it features an American Revolution, a juicy sex scandal, and a cast of Hamilton's friends, lovers, and enemies. Maybe because of its nearly 3-hour runtime, the play manages to avoid many shortcuts that other biopics have to take. Also, they rap kinda fast, which makes it easy to jam a lot of information in a short amount of time.
Spying on the British government, I take the measurements, information, and then I smuggle it to my brother's revolutionary covenant. I'm running with the sons of liberty, and I am loving it.
The play is also full of ahistorical moments like this, when John Laurens and pals introduce themselves as if they're a troupe of subway performers. Despite a lack of primary sources on Lafayette's relationship to Showtime, Hamilton is frequently lauded for its adherence to historical fact. But when people do quibble, it's generally when Hamilton's inventions meet historical fact at this weird zone of, wait, is this actually true? And that intersection and the resulting confusion about what is and isn't true may very well end up making us feel less rather than more informed. For instance, historians David Waldstreicher and Jeffrey Paisley argue that the play is part of a genre of founders chic, painting Hamilton and the other founders in an overly patriotic and positive light. The storytelling, they argue, is fueled by made-up character and personality traits rather than by the facts. In real life, there's a lot of nuance on Hamilton's relation to racial or class issues in colonial America. But the playwright, probably for clarity's sake, chose to skip past that nuance. Instead, Miranda uses a lot of creative license when diving into Hamilton's views on slavery. In the play, John Laurens claims that he and Hamilton
write essays against slavery.
And later in Yorktown, the men insist that
we'll never be free until we end slavery.
Waldstreicher and Paisley see this as an exaggerated fantasy portrait of Hamilton as a staunch abolitionist, when in reality, Hamilton wasn't an anti-slavery activist. In fact, he bought and sold slaves for his in-laws. Now, this all may be very intentional, since Miranda very clearly opted to tell a story about the very white and very slave-owning founders through a predominantly black musical tradition with a multicultural cast. But these likely deliberate mischaracterizations are really important. and can help us understand a bigger phenomenon, something I'm going to call the uncanny valley of truth in historical fiction. You probably know of the uncanny valley. It's basically a graph showing how cute things get as they take on human characteristics until they get too human-like and become absolutely horrifying. But then they get even more human-like and it's totally fine again. That uncomfortably close to human part of the graph is the uncanny valley. It's unsettling. So Sonic the Hedgehog is kinda cute because he's a hedgehog with a few human elements like walking upright, talking, and wearing gloves. But give Sonic some too realistic baby teeth and holy hell you're in the uncanny valley. Now put some Steve Buscemi eyes on him and we can see how deep this abyss really is. While no one is getting nightmares about Lin-Manuel's rap battle, we can see a similar kind of graph in the truth and fiction. If I were to tell you a story of a time-traveling Scott Bakula who gets stuck in a wrestler's body, you'd be like, cool, that's not real history. On the other hand, if I were instead to show you ESPN's The Last Dance with Bakula deepfaked onto the body of Tony Kukoc, you might say, what the f***? Is this real? Did Scott Bakula play for the Chicago Bulls? That's because the latter example lands somewhere in the uncanny valley of the truth. The part of the scale between fiction and reality where something looks close enough to reality to bewilder an unsuspecting audience. In the case of people complaining about historical fiction, it's the moment where the line between fake rap battles and real beliefs between Hamilton blur and become unsettling for anyone who is paying attention. The real danger, of course, is that instead of becoming more informed about historical events through some light embellishments, people become more ignorant as they fill their brains with fiction consumed as truth. You, as a casual viewer of Hamilton, might have assumed some details to be rooted in historical fact, because why would they make up the assertion, for instance, that Thomas Jefferson was absent during most of the war? Our guess? Probably because it made for a very charming opening song to Act 2.
So what did I miss? What did I miss?
Now, before we start sounding too curmudgeonly, a quick caveat. Compared to most historical fiction, Miranda's fact-checking is actually pretty buttoned up. There are far more egregious examples of writers convincingly changing history and thereby very much misleading their audience.
Don't go in there.
Still, the fact that within Miranda's well-researched story that so many details are just plain wrong can feel a little bit alarming. It speaks to the potential risks of trusting historical fiction without spending hours fact-checking it afterwards. At the very least, it might make you embarrass yourself on trivia night.
It's like everyone gets a point for Albert Einstein. Oh, wait. Except for the Einsteins.
Nowhere is this more apparent than in writer-director Adam McKay's absurdist biopic, Vice, which claims to be based on the real history of Dick Cheney's tenure as vice president under George W. Bush. As such, McKay seems pretty self-aware about the problems of turning history into a blockbuster film. With that in mind, he goes to great lengths to signpost the fictionalized parts of the movie. At one point, Dick and Lynn Cheney have an entire conversation in Shakespearean verse.
Thou hast honored thy vows to wife and crown.
As if to really drive home the fact that we made this whole thing up. Uncanny Valley averted. But as journalist Jen Williams put it, the film as a whole is about as accurate about Cheney and the Iraq War as Sharknado is about sharks and the weather. Williams argues that the exclusive focus on Cheney reduces the roles of everyone else who made decisions in the Bush administration. Also, the film just makes a lot of things up. One pivotal scene in Vice, set in the 1970s, depicts a conversation between Dick Cheney and Antonin Scalia that seems true to history. Only problem, it's entirely a work of fiction. In the scene, Scalia introduces Cheney to the concept of unitary executive theory.
Are you familiar with the theory of the unitary executive?
The concept of unitary executive theory wasn't even around until the 1980s. And according to legal scholars, the film butchers the term, interpreting it to mean that everything the president does is legal, which is simply not true. In his apparent determination to paint Cheney as a mastermind who was building a case for unlimited executive power early in his career, Adam McKay dreamed up a fake conversation. This may be compelling when creating a cogent character arc. Vice's Cheney finally got the unlimited power he had wanted for so long, but it's simply not based in fact. It's also implied that Dick Cheney received intelligence briefings before the president did.
We will also be receiving the daily intelligence briefing before the president. That gets us inside the decision curve.
This is a magnificent detail showing Cheney's apparent capacity to manipulate his presidential boss, George Bush. Unfortunately, it seems to be entirely invented. but there's no Shakespeare or absurdism to indicate this part of the movie's fiction. By sometimes, but not always, signposting what was fake, McKay had inadvertently made the uncanny valley of truth so much worse. Combined with an uncanny makeup job on Christian Bale, the presentation had audiences leaving theaters thinking, wow, I can't believe Dick Cheney did all those things. And maybe that's exactly what Adam McKay wanted, to influence public opinion with a compelling story. But it had journalists like James Mann sounding the alarm for it being lazy and irresponsible, even as Mann argued that the real-life actions of Cheney were far worse. Filmmakers venture into this uncanny valley of truth a lot, especially in biopics and period pieces based on true events, and also whatever the hell this is. So, can historical fiction ever avoid this trap? The way information is communicated and the expectations of the audience seem to make all the difference. It seems like some works of historical fiction can get by without much scrutiny because it's clear that they're works of art and not real.
Are you not entertained?
They never venture into that uncanny valley of truth. Or if they do, the stakes are pretty low.
This is Sparta!
Take for example The Favorite. Yorgos Lanthimos' dark comedy is so obviously a satire that it would be hard to mistake it as historically accurate. Even though the characters are loosely based on real people, a melodramatic plot and rapid dialogue,
Madame Tournay, you may have the tapestry budget you asked for. Spend 1 penny more and I will take your fingernails in you.
along with physical comedy, unconventional camera angles, and cross dissolves on bunnies, make it very clear that this stuff shouldn't be taken as fact. It also helps that there wasn't a block of text at the top of the film claiming that it was based on a true story. Of course, you could claim not to be based in any fact and actually smuggle in real history. Some historical fiction centers around completely fake premises and characters, from period horror like HBO's Lovecraft Country to video game series like Assassin's Creed. In these works, the central characters are completely made up and things like monsters and genetic memory exist, but there's still knowledge to be gleaned from them about how things were. Historical accuracy comes through in things like costume design, world building, and general depictions of past customs. Assassin's Creed Unity is a helpful example. Set during the French Revolution, the game's design was heavily influenced by archival research and recruited the help of multiple academic historians. Dr. Jean-Clement Martin consulted on the script and scholar Laurent Turcot assisted with the look and feel of 18th century Paris. The resulting virtual model of the city was so detailed that Ubisoft offered to use the game's digital version of the Notre Dame Cathedral to help rebuild the real one after it burned down in 2019. So while the whole traveling into your ancestors' brains and characters are quite obviously fiction, the experience of France during the Revolution might have some historical value for players. In HBO's Watchmen, there was a kind of reverse uncanny valley, where the very real Tulsa Race Massacre was dramatized in a story featuring a blue dude who hangs dong. Many viewers, instead of being caught off guard by a historical fabrication a la Hamilton, were instead caught off guard by a historical truth. Similarly, in Lovecraft Country, the characters and story are entirely a work of fiction, especially the horrifying monsters. Still, many of the scenarios the characters experience mirror very real experiences of Black Americans during Jim Crow. So hearing the sheriff explain what a sundown town is might get people asking, is this true?
Any of you all know what a sundown town is?
Yes, sir, we do.
Well, this is a sundown county.
And then they might Google it, and now you have someone who learned something through the power of fiction. This is all to say, just because something is a fictionalized account of history doesn't mean we should knock it for being all lies. It just kind of depends what the lessons are and how they're communicated. It also matters how we, as an audience, approach the material. But to get back to more cut and dry historical fiction like Hamilton or Vice, their problems aren't unique to biopics or biomusicals. Waldstreicher and Paisley acknowledge a lot of their problems with Miranda's portrait of Hamilton actually came from Chernow's characterization of Hamilton in the biography the musical is based on. It simply dropped the latest version of Founder Chic to a faster beat.
Let's take a stand with the stamina God is granted us. Hamilton won't abandon shit. Yo, let's steal their cannons.
The point is, if Hamilton the play can lose some of the nuance, so can actual written texts of history. The editors of the book Historians on Hamilton admit that history is not simply a matter of facts, but is an interpretation of the existing archival record actively constructed by whoever is serving as the historian. The musical acknowledges that there are certain things we simply cannot know. Indeed, there is a whole song about how we don't really know what went down between Hamilton, Jefferson, and Madison in the room where it happens.
No one else was in the room where it happened. The room where it happened. The room where it happened.
This suggests a healthy amount of self-awareness. In another Historians on Hamilton essay, Joseph Adelman stresses that Hamilton makes absolutely no claim to being a work of scholarly history, and that it resembles a tradition of historical fiction that's been around almost as long as the United States. He writes that, almost as soon as the Revolutionary War ended in 1783, Americans began to discuss, hypothesize, and conjecture about what the new nation would be, in part by arguing over how it was born. To Adelman, Hamilton is something that's not entirely credible historically, but is incredibly accessible to a wide audience as a piece of historical fiction, which makes it valuable. While it's important for scholars to engage with and call out its factual errors, there's no denying that Hamilton, at the very least, teaches us about how history is communicated and canonized, and at most, gets us excited about history. And I think that has to be worth something. All I know is that when I die, the answer to who lives, who dies, who tells your story better not be Adam McKay. So what do you think, Wisecrack? Is historical fiction a useful tool to get us jazzed about the story of America's founding and the exhilarating history of constitutional law, or is it just going to confuse everyone on their AP history exam? Let us know what you think in the comments. Big thanks to our amazing patrons for your support. Don't throw away your shot at hitting that subscribe button, and as always, thanks for watching. Later.